Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with another Alberta provincial election forecast. Now, not too much has materially changed since the last update. We've had several polls, which is why we're getting an update, and things have happened, like the budget. But things are mostly status quo. And the status quo is the UCP seems to be fluctuating. It's going between around 50 and 48. And because of those fluctuations, everybody else moves accordingly. This shouldn't be much of a surprise, because the main thing in this election in Alberta this year is that does everyone who voted UCP in 2019, or similarly, everyone who voted federally conservative in 2021 or 2019, do they turn out? That's not a given. Now, you have the first order factor on this, where federal elections tend to have higher turnout than provincial ones. Okay, so you should expect fewer federal conservative turnout than provincial conservatives. That's already more or less a given. You look at 2019. Jason Kenney got fewer votes than either O'Toole or Scheer. So we should expect probably something similar, but that still leaves the question on the 2019 UCP voters. Do they show up? We do not have this question with 2019 NDP voters, maybe 2019 Alberta Party voters, though they're rarely broken out in the polling just because they're less significant of a force. If they win a seat, that would be a good showing for them on May 29th. But unlike the UCP, it seems like in the last two cycles in Alberta, 2015, 2019, and also equally 2019, 2021 federally, the left of center voting bloc consistently turns out. There's not much difference between the federal and the provincial turnout of these left of centers. Maybe 2015 federally might have been a bit different, and by that I mean it might be a bit high, but I had to double check the numbers, and I do not have those yet. Though I don't think it's much different. I think it's more the federal conservative turnout was suppressed in 2015. So there is really no question here. Does the NDP base turn out? There might be some numbers on the edges there, but they're very likely to get around 600 to 640,000 voters. A good election, they might get 700, and a bad one, they might get 500. But you were likely to see at minimum 5/6 of the base turnout, and if lucky, they might exceed previous vote references and have a higher turnout. Now, some of that higher turnout might be defectors from the UCP. The polls, as is, currently have, I believe, about 12% of the UCP voters inclined to defect. In fact, I will just pull up the numbers here properly just so I can give you any accurate analysis of this. It's about 11% right now. About 11% of 2019 UCP voters are defecting NDP right now by my model. But this heavily hinges on the reluctant voters. Now, if we go to Abacus here, that's the ledger. Abacus has noted here that approximately 20% of 2019 UCP voters are undecided. He later breaks, or it's also broken out, where is it here? Here we go. That 16% of the total 2019 base are quote-unquote reluctant UCP voters. In other words, these are voters, 16% of the total voting pool are reluctant UCP voters. They voted for UCP in 2019, but they're not sure today. Or they might be voting for a different party today, equally. Now, this, again, shouldn't be surprising to anyone. Kenney, in 2019, came in on the promise that he was going to be conservative, he was going to unite the right, for lack of a better term, and he was going to run province better than the NDP. Now, you can argue whether he succeeded on that last point. I think it is definitely up for debate. I'm inclined to say he probably did better than Notley would have through COVID, but I don't think it's necessarily given. But what we can say is that his actions through COVID in the last 2 years prior to his removal in June was that he alienated his right flank. That's why the Wild Rose Independence Party started polling so high. And if we look at this, we can see down here, in 2021 and into early 2022, the Wild Rose Independence Party's polling in double digits. In some polls, as high as 20% in June 2021. Now, that might have just been an anomaly, but it is safe to say he had alienated his right flank. This has prompted the UCP to basically vote him out as leadership because the right flank of the party did not like how he handled COVID, did not like the lockdowns, did not like the mandates, did not like how he treated preachers. That is why he was removed. Then we get Danielle Smith. Smith, at least through her leadership campaign, campaigned on the promise that she was going to remeld the right flank of the party, rally it together. She succeeded overwhelmingly thus far with this. If we go here, we see right now only about 3% are voting for the Wild Rose Independence Party. And she's sitting roughly around 50% of the vote. A little down from 2019, but that's to be expected. Given COVID, given 4 years, there's more young people going into the electorate who have not voted for Notley. They did not really pay attention to how Notley governed, so they have no issues with her. A lot of the older voters did not like Notley's governing style, so they turned out to vote against her. Because the thing I really want to stress here, Notley did not lose any voters from 2015. She gained voters going into 2019. The reason she lost in 2019 is the parties united and they turned out. Though, if only 32% of progressive conservatives in 2015 voted Wild Rose, that faction would have won the election swimmingly. Even if the rest voted, well, not necessarily if the rest voted NDP, but they only needed 32% to beat the NDP. You can do the math from there for how many could defect NDP before the NDP win. It's quite a bit. But the weakness with Smith's strategy thus far is it seems to have alienated the more centrist voters. They see, according to David Collette of Abacus Research, this group that seems reluctant are mostly female, mostly federal conservative voters, mostly older, generally mostly urban, well, that's not the best way to phrase this. Mostly not Edmonton voters. It's unlikely to me that this group is going to meaningfully vote NDP. So the question with this group in this election is, do they vote? Because when this group of people, these reluctant UCPers, are 84% federal conservative voters, it's extremely unlikely that they will break NDP. Not impossible by any means, but the provincial NDP in a lot of ways is a reflection of the federal NDP. It's very difficult to imagine someone who despises or does not like the federal NDP, because the federal NDP stands to destroy Alberta, basically, would vote for the provincial counterpart, which in a lot of regards, regardless of Notley's rhetoric, historically in 2015 was very similar. Now, don't get me wrong, Notley is more moderate than Singh is. But that's not really saying much, because her voter base isn't. Her voter base is the same base that votes for Trudeau and votes for Singh. Maybe she has the stick-to-itiveness and the composure to resist her base and govern as an actual moderate, but that seems exceedingly unlikely. Usually, left-wing politicians vote the way their base wants them to, unlike right-wing politicians who usually vote against what their base wants. So it seems to me that these reluctant UCP voters have no chance of meaningfully going NDP. The question that remains is, do they vote? And that's the question Smith and her campaign team need to look at going into this election. They don't need to be terribly concerned about the Wild Rose voters, though they should be. You can't take them for granted, or else you will lose them as well. But they need to figure out what policy concerns that they can push that will motivate these reluctant voters. You don't want to pander to them, because pandering to them, at least doing things that is perceived by voters as pandering to them, is likely not going to work, because it will likely alienate the right flank of the party, and it will likely not actually ingratiate Smith's party to these reluctant voters. The way to get them is to try to find and target policy that the right flank is neutral to, the reluctant voters like, and the left despises. Yes, the plan for success here is once again wedge politics. And we shouldn't be surprised by this. In the age of the internet, wedge issues and wedging voting blocks is extremely important because of the nature of the internet. Any politician you can name, Notley, Smith, Taze, Trudeau, Poilievre, anyone, has so much exposure to any politically active person. And even those not politically active during elections will get so much exposure to these politicians that a politician's personal charisma and personal likability matters less. That is why you are seeing politicians who have any chance of governing being disliked. It's extremely hard to be a governing politician in 2023 and not be majority disapproved. If you manage to be in charge, you are the prime minister, you are the premier, and the majority of people like you, that either tells you that everything is going terribly wrong in your jurisdiction, or, more likely to me, your predecessor was awful. It's very difficult on your own merits to have a positive approval rating while wielding government power these days. There's no allure. There's no mysticism. There's no aloofness of the feds, of the province. You can see them. You can see their decisions. People can argue with them on Twitter. Once you can argue with a politician on Twitter, their allure is gone. What they have left is how they govern, what policies they're actually implementing, and what their rhetoric is. Rhetoric can give you a huge advantage. It can drive a lot of things, especially if you've never actually wielded power before. If you've never wielded power, you can win elections on the back of rhetoric. However, if you are like Notley, or to a lesser extent you're like Smith, you have wielded power, so rhetoric alone doesn't work. What you need to do is not just promise things and deliver upon them. You have to figure out what your base wants and give them that. And more importantly, you have to find something your base wants that the other person cannot deliver upon. Now, we're going to make an allusion here to the 2021 Nova Scotia provincial election. Why did Tim Houston win? Tim Houston won largely because the NDP only targets urban voters in the province. So everyone outside of Halifax and Sydney would not vote for him, for them, in any meaningful number. Enough to win seats. Ever since Darrell Dexter, the party has had bad track record in the rural areas and has generally moved to be more urban, more university educated, more left-wing, especially socially. So the NDP was out. So then you left the Liberals and the Progressive Conservatives to fight in the rural areas. And keep in mind, the rural areas are roughly 60% of the population of Nova Scotia. This is where the election is decided. And I'm including small towns, because, let's be honest, a town of 10,000 people isn't urban. So you have this battle between these two parties in the rural areas. You have the Liberals who are governing. What is the track record the Liberals had while governing? They had balanced budgets, strong fiscal conservatism, for the most part. But healthcare collapsed. Healthcare wasn't doing well when they got power, but they cut spending on healthcare, and they cut services in healthcare, particularly in rural areas, hospital closures, lack of family doctors, such and such. So the PCs campaigned on something the Liberals can't campaign on. After you've been in power for 8 years, no one's going to trust that your party, your leadership, is going to meaningfully turn vote on healthcare. And to his credit, Ian Rankin wasn't campaigning on that. He couldn't campaign on that. He would have lost. Even harder if he did, because he would have lost credibility, because he would have been trading his voters who liked the Liberal Party's fiscal conservatism and replaced them with nothing, because people who are unhappy with how he handled healthcare, well, not him, the Liberal Party handled healthcare, we're not going to vote for them. So by doing this, by targeting healthcare, Houston put himself in a position where the Liberals can't contest him, the NDP are not trusted, so he wins by default. And this is why no one saw this coming, mostly because there wasn't a lot of polls on this, but also because it's very likely a lot of people were undecided voters who made up their mind in the ballot box. They sat down, well, they didn't sit down, they walked into the ballot booth, looked at the piece of paper, and were like, I want a doctor and voted Houston. What does this mean in Alberta? Well, Smith needs to find an issue that doesn't alienate her right flank and deliver something for the centrist, center-right faction of her party that the NDP cannot deliver upon. That they have no trust in delivering upon it. That they have no credibility to deliver upon it. Now, I can't tell you out east in Nova Scotia, what this issue might be in Alberta. I don't have the oversight, I don't have the access to the information to really know intimately enough what the issues are. But I can tell you how Smith wins. And so far, she's done this quite swimmingly with her right flank. She's given her right flank many goodies, many policy wins that will make it impossible for any splinter faction to leverage them in meaningful detail. And any attempt from the NDP to scare them home. And when I say scare them home, I mean discredit Smith to them. For example, the Alberta Sovereignty Act and the recent Alberta firearms protection legislation are two such things that secure her right flank. It seems to me that her plan right now is she's going to lock up the right flank, nice and secure, with real, actual legislative wins that do not alienate her centrist voters. Alienate the left-wing voters, because they're not going to vote for her anyways. But secure her right flank, and then during the campaign, when her right flank is secure, she's going to campaign to win her centrist faction. This isn't going to be her pivoting. At least not if she has any hopes of wanting to be reelected in 2027. Someone might sell it as a pivot, but it won't be. It's campaign strategy. She's already given policy victories to her right flank. What she needs then is to give policy victories to her centrist faction that don't alienate her right flank. She does this, she wins with these margins. It's not close, a bit closer than 2019 perhaps, but a decisive victory that no one can spell otherwise. This would probably be the demise of Notley. It's hard to imagine she could stay on. Maybe she will. The NDP have a very high tolerance for failure. But after 2 election defeats in a row, especially if her number of real voters doesn't change, which I suspect it won't, at least not significantly, I don't see a path for her to stay on. Though, again, any NDPers or any left-wingers in Alberta who are watch my channel, you can comment on that if I'm off base there, but I suspect Notley herself might just resign. Because remember, she's not a young woman anymore. She's, I believe, in her mid-50s. So if she were to run again in 2027, she's looking to be in her 60s. That'd be her 4th serious election that she's contested. Serious as in with a chance of victory. Or conceivable chance of victory. It's rare for leaders to do that. Especially after having 2 consecutive decisive defeats. You could try to spin this that she gained vote share, but unless she actually gained voters, I don't think it's going to matter. Notley in this election really has no path to victory. That's the issue. Smith has a path to defeat. Notley has no path to victory. This is a really, really, really important thing to remember. A lot of elections, there is a party that will win by default. The other party can't actually win the election. The default party can lose it. The reason for this is the NDP base in Alberta is too small to win. But the Alberta Conservatives are fractured enough and disunited enough that if they don't turn out to vote in sufficient numbers, Notley can can sneak to victory. That's what happened in 2015. Notley did not win 2015. The right wing lost it. If you combined the UCP and the Wild Rose Party voters in 2015, they win a decisive victory, very similar to this. Notley had no path to victory other than disunity among the right. That's the same story today. There is no path to victory for Notley other than conservatives staying home. That's why, if we go back to here, that's the wrong one. Go back to here. We see right now, with a lot of these polls, the NDP are up. The NDP are up because a lot of reluctant UCP voters are undecided. And because of how these polls calculate things, undecideds are removed from the sample and numbers are calculated from there. So if you go back all the way to October with this Janet Brown poll, 38 to 47, it's not 38 to 47 because the NDP has gained 14 percentage points more voters. It's 38 to 47 because the UCP has 17% of their voters not voting. That math might be slightly wrong, but you get the idea. The NDP physically cannot win. They can only do a good showing and hope Smith fails. This election here, I cannot stress this enough, is the main election, probably the preeminent election in Canadian history, that is going to be decided by turnout alone. The factions in Alberta are pretty concrete. There's not much in the way of people cross-pollinating between parties, especially if you consider all right-wing conservatives in Alberta, which federally is about 1.5 million, which is almost more than the number of voters in the 2019 Alberta election. Yes, there's almost more federal voters than there are people who voted at all in Alberta in 2019. 1.9 million to about 1.5. This is the institutional, structural, societal advantage of the right wing in Alberta. Their weakness, and this is a meaningful weakness, is they're not united. Federally, they are united because people hate Trudeau. Because Singh and Trudeau only want to destroy Alberta. They extract money from Alberta, give it to Quebec to bribe Quebec to stay in the Federation, and they destroy Alberta's oil industry, passing laws to make it impossible to export, passing laws to make it very difficult to expand drilling. These things unite Albertan conservatives federally. You can also throw in things like guns as well. And that turns them out. Even a weak, uninspiring, flippy-floppy, centrist O'Toole drove out 1.1 million voters in 2021. Kenney only got 1 million. This is the advantage the Conservatives have. Cannot stress this enough. The catch, though, is provincially, they do not have this galvanizing force, which is federal laws destroying the province. All you have left provincially are more mundane issues that the right is pretty much hamstrung to deal with. It's very difficult to propose right-wing solutions to healthcare or education in Canada. Not because there are none, and I don't think it's even because there's no will to do it. It's because a hostile federal government will take money from you. our system is in a really ridiculous world where the feds control a significant portion of healthcare spending dollars. So any right-wing solutions to healthcare risk losing those dollars. You're seeing this right now in Ontario, where the federal Liberals are threatening to take money from Ford because Ford is proposing right-wing ideas to try to solve healthcare delivery. Not a very right-wing idea, mind you. Private delivery but public funding is the norm in Europe. See France as an example. No one thinks France is a radical right-wing country, do they? But that's the situation we are. It's very difficult. You are hamstrung by a Fed who is ideologically opposed to any ideas that are not left-wing. Now, if we see a quality of government, I think that actually helps provincial governments like Smith, because it frees them to do more right-of-center things, to experiment with them. And that's one of the reasons why healthcare is an issue the NDP sort of are winning right now in Alberta. If all you can do is left-wing healthcare reform, the left-wing party looks more legit on it. But that said, Smith has an advantage here. She's governing. She's in charge. She has the ability to disarm healthcare as a major issue in the election. And she seems to be doing that right now. Her budget that she proposed has a very substantial increase in healthcare funding, as one example. It's pretty hard to sell that to any swing voters, if there are any in Alberta, that the NDP are going to do meaningfully different. They could probably bid up more dollars, but in general, Alberta's fairly fiscally conservative. Not super fiscally conservative, not anywhere close to a US Republican. But on Canada as a whole, they tend to be more fiscally conservative. It'll be very difficult to pitch that. Even more healthcare spending on top of a huge budget already. So that's the situation we are at in Alberta. Smith has a clear goal. All she has to do is motivate and rally the center right, to vote on May 29th. Though, if she fails, she probably still wins. Pardon me. As we see here, this is what my forecast model is saying right now. This is what the 2019 results were. This is what my forecast model says. If 20% of UCP voters don't vote, if 20% don't vote, these are numbers that you're seeing in Ledger, you're seeing in Abacus. 20% don't vote, the UCP still wins. Now, if they vote NDP, that's a different story. But if you just take those 20% of voters and they disappear, they stay at home and they watch television or play on their computers, the UCP still wins. It's a close victory, popular vote-wise. It's not close seat-wise. It's still like 51 to 39, I think. Math doesn't add up. It's 51 to 36. Sorry about that. So there is plenty of wiggle room in this target here. But that is the concern. All Smith has to do to win a decisive victory is get the turnout to be normal. She doesn't need to have a wild turnout. She doesn't need to increase turnout one voter. If she gets the exact same turnout as Kenny, she's going to have a perfectly adequate and perfectly fine victory. No one could reasonably spin the UCP with 58 seats and about 50% of the vote as a rebuke or a defeat for Smith. Considering the party was on track to lose just last year, at this time last year, this is a tremendous victory if she can keep the boat straight. As long as she just cruises to victory and doesn't fumble, doesn't make a mistake, she's fine. And even then, she has lots of room for mistakes. Because keep in mind, no one will consider this an advantage except me right here. But Smith has a lot of gaffes. Especially in her first 6 months. She had a lot of gaffes. Well, first 3 months, I will say. But a lot of gaffes is a good thing. In the long term. It's embarrassing, it's awkward, it's not ideal. You should have 0 gaffes. But in reality, gaffes happen. If you look at qualia federally, sometimes gaffes happen because of other people. Not on anything you did. The trick here is you have to handle your gaffes. And if we're in a situation like Smith, where she keeps governing perfectly adequately, there's nothing wrong at all, I can see ideologically or practically, with anything she's done so far. But you make silly gas all the time. Well, voters will understand and will learn and will know you make silly gaffes, but you do the things we want, so who cares? This is why Trudeau seems bulletproof to scandal. He makes silly, stupid scandals all the time, but he's been in government and he's done things left-wing voters like. So left-wing voters look at him and is like, you are a silly, silly man who does silly things, but you end up doing the things we want, so I'm going to vote for you anyways. I don't really care that you're a silly fool who does silly things. I'd rather the silly fool who does the things I want than gamble on someone else. And that's actually the position Smith has accidentally put herself into. She's in government. She's done things that no right-wing person I can reasonably consider could really fault in her actual things she's done while governing. And at the end of the day, she's done it. Like, if you have only victory success or policy successes, but silly gaffes, no one reasonable is going to hold that against you. Anyone who's already holding it against you is already not voting for you. She's not at risk of losing any more voters than when she was in December. Because she already has the expectation she makes silly gaffes, but gives policy wins. In this regard, if I'm correct and she wins in May 29th, she's probably going to feel like Teflon, like Ford, like Trudeau. You make a bunch of silly gaffes, but do policy wins. In the age of the internet, no one cares. Well, I'll wrap this up here. If you liked the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe, comment below what you think. If you think my analysis is off base, if you think I'm misunderstanding something, if I'm missing something, maybe the Alberta Party is going to go to a 50% win. That was silly, but, if you think I'm missing anything, let me know. I love all the comments I get, even when you're trolling me. So with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will see you next week with something different.